This is the Iron Strong Podcast, the #1 podcast to help you optimize your health through recovery, nutrition, performance, and mindset, where we bring on industry professionals in each one of these specific areas to help you maximize your performance as a human being.
Hey everybody, it's Coach Guy.
Dr. Luke Greenwell.
And you're listening to the Iron Strong Podcast. And super excited today to have someone on the show with us, innovator, creator, and pretty amazing man all the way around. Dr. Alan Lim, how are you?
I'm good. You guys are too kind. Jeez, you haven't even seen me naked and all these compliments.
Look how smart he is with
And
all those books.
So smart with all those books in the background. I love it.
That's right. That's right. They taught me how to read a long time ago.
Nice. That's a big skill, and we enjoy
a major
that.
skill.
We appreciate people that can do that.
If you can read books and you can read graphs, you can do anything.
That's true. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. So, hey, thanks for coming on with us today. We really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy, and we wanted to dive in today, talk about you, talk about Skratch, talk about where things are headed, where you see things headed in the in this industry, particularly in the area that you guys reside, which seems to be growing a little bit every day, which is pretty cool. But just to give our listeners an idea, what was your background? What was kind of your sports background growing up? What were you exposed to?
Yeah, all my parts are from China. I was born in the Philippines, made in the Philippines. I was raised in Los Angeles, California. That was where I was programmed. We were a poor immigrant family initially, and around 1984, when the Olympics came to Los Angeles, my parents argued back and forth about whether or not they'd buy tickets to the Olympic Games. And my dad eventually went behind my mom's back, bought tickets to the games. And to this day, that was one of the most life-changing events that she's ever, been part of, in terms of seeing sport on such a grand level and seeing that connection of people, not just through activity or a competition, but through the idea that competition in sport can foster human dignity, right?
Sure.
And for me, my background in sports, I like to say, is getting to see those Olympics at a very young age and how it imbued me with the sense of Olympism, the sense of athleticism, wanting to be more involved in that world. And I got involved in that world pretty much right away through the one thing I love doing, which was riding bicycles around Los Angeles. I was really lucky, looking back at seeing how many people volunteered in my life, right? There was always just some adult who I didn't know who made sure that I wasn't killing myself, right? Like whether it was a group ride or whether it was meeting at the Rose Bowl every Monday night to compete in local time trials. And, I don't even know all of them anymore, right? But it was the guys with clipboards who just showed up to volunteer to be part of the community through sports. And I was really lucky to have that because my parents didn't have time for it. I was effectively a latchkey kid, but I was lucky enough to grow up in a very cycling centric community with a lot of volunteers who showed up to help young kids like myself get interested and involved in the sport.
So it's interesting. The 80s in cycling in the US, you saw the development of the 7-Eleven team, and there was a little bit of, I think there was a little bit of a build, in terms of excitement around American pro cycling and things like that. You had Greg LeMond, obviously, at that time too. But what was that cycling scene like? It's different. Obviously, we're in the Midwest, so we didn't get quite that. We were so particularly within the 80s, and growing up in the 80s myself, the big three sports pretty much ruled. That was the thing. So what was that like out on the West Coast?
On the West Coast, it felt mainstream when I was participating in it because there were so many people who would show up for these iconic group rides, like the Rose Bowl ride, or like, this Montrose Cycling Club ride that started right by my house by Descanso Gardens, the Lagrange ride. There's so many people who showed up for these group rides, and it was cool and it was hip and it was part of the Southern California, kind of surfing outdoor running culture. That being said, there were only like maybe 2 or 3 of us in my high school who rode bikes.
Okay.
So despite the fact that I felt like I was part of the mainstream community, it was definitely not mainstream when you look at it from the perspective of kids. And, now you go back to, say, my local high school, and there are 50 plus kids involved in NICA at my old high school, Crescenta Valley High,
Wow.
right?
That,
So there's a big difference there. The group rides are just as big. That part of the culture I think is just as big. So I think I was really, really fortunate and really lucky.
so from, as you matured through cycling, where did that road, take you? Obviously from group rides and doing stuff like you said, you were fortunate enough to have these volunteers in your life. Where
Yeah,
did that road go?
I think that road went. Um, it's very interesting when I reflect back up on it and I think about what that journey was about. I see it as a journey of friendship. And there were a lot of young kids that I met at a very young age that are still my friends today. I met Didi met Barry when I was 16 years old at junior nationals in Pennsylvania. And I remember I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a girl, it's Didi. She won nationals. And she was so cool. She was like, do you want a pizza? Okay. Yeah. And now, she has a son who's on his way to being a world-class cyclist. And she sent me a note like, hey, my kid wants to come to Colorado and ride bikes. Are you willing to, can you help him out? You know, that nationals, I was in a breakaway with George Hincapie,
Wow.
and, we have been friends since Jonathan Vaughters was in that race. I was teammates with Freddie Rodriguez and
Yeah.
Antonio Cruz, and, some big names or athletes who become big names in cycling. But I think it's these friendships that, garner uh, or created the trust that allowed me to enter for profession, right? Like, I think that you can't, you not only have to be really good and really love what you do, but you have to foster the relationships, right?
Sure.
And those relationships maybe are a bigger foot in the door than anything else.
That's, and that's interesting too. I mean, for people who aren't super familiar with cycling, it is an individual sport. However, you understand, well, the team dynamic of it, where you have a group of guys or a group of women who are working for maybe one or two people on that team in order, with the hopes of getting them to the front and keeping them there, for the race. We're giving them the best opportunity to be up at the front. And so I think it's, where so many people may view cycling as an individual thing, you had the opportunity to see the actual team aspect of it, where, you talk about friendships and these relationships. How critical is that, or was that, for you and for people who are cyclists?
Yeah, it's everything. And I think that that's a big part of sport. Sport is not just making your physical body better, but it's learning how to be part of society, right? On a big level. It's learning how to socialize. It's learning how to be put in your place. It's learning how to put others in their place. It is a big, strong lesson in human communication and human relationships, because you go through a lot with one another and you see each other in really difficult times, and you travel together and you get annoyed with one another. And, it's very, very dynamic in that way. I think for me too, growing up riding in Los Angeles in terms of West Coast vibe, is that even in the 80s, and maybe, I don't know, it almost sometimes feels like more so, there were a ton of minorities and diversity in the sport of cycling. Cycling was the one place where you could be an athlete, and there was, on my team, you know, all creeds, all nations, all races, right?
Very cool. Right.
Asians to Hispanics to African American. Um, we were all represented, and that felt really normal. And it wasn't until I came into the sport professionally that I realized that that wasn't normal, and
Yeah.
that was kind of a big shock to me. There's a big Filipino community in this in SoCal cycling. A lot of diversity, which for me as a young kid, despite the fact that cycling is considered to be fairly Anglo, it made me feel like I fit in.
So what was that like when you transitioned to the pro ranks? I mean, as you say, as an Asian American yourself, and you recognize, I mean, for people who see the sport on, on TV now. And even when I was growing up, I mean, there were Europeans, so you were familiar with French, Italian, Spanish, some German at the time, but it was predominantly a Anglo sport. So what was that entry for you like at that time?
It was terrible. It was racist as capital F.
Yeah.
And I remember, getting notes at races from other, teams or folks or people. They'd like steal my rice cooker, leave me notes like, "You don't belong here, Chinaman," or like, walking, through the team buses at the end of the races and people sticking their heads out, making kung fu sounds at me. Um, a lot of the typical normal racial slurs, I kind of almost got to the point where that felt very normal. It felt very normal to be called out for my race. It felt very normal to be bullied. Um, it took, I think, a long time before people realized that I was more than just my racial identity, or more importantly, more than a stereotype of that racial identity. Sometimes I could lean into that racial identity and, threaten to kick their ass, and that would scare them. Sometimes I could lean into that racial identity and pretend that I had more of the answers and that I was smarter or more intelligent or a better quote unquote citizen model. But we all have our flaws, and I think for me, coming into European cycling, it took a long time before I felt like I belonged, and I didn't feel like I belonged until I started working with the TIAA-CREF cycling program run by Jonathan Vaughters, and it was a young group of athletes, and we were all kind of misfits, and so the bad news bears vibe always worked better for me, and I liked that, and I started to lean into it, and I began to really, really appreciate being different and doing funny, goofy things to accentuate that difference, like making a T-shirt with a picture of myself holding a rice cooker that said, "This is my rice cooker," or making the hats that said rice, or even the science hat that you're wearing.
Do you feel that finding kind of a group of guys that were the so quote unquote misfits, and then like having people really sort of just judge you on your race was an additional driver for you to get to the top, to excel, to kind of, I don't know if to prove them wrong, but to prove them that you belong there with them, and that to show other minorities that they could do this as well?
Yeah, I think that some ambition and some motivation is always driven by having a chip on your shoulder, but it's not sustainable. That's not a sustainable driver. I think this might sound kind of cliche, but love is the sustainable driver. And it's the love that you have for your friends, for your teammates, for the organization, and yourself accountable to others. And that's what you live up to. You don't live up to the identity or the chip on your shoulder. That stuff has maybe too much vitriol and too much anger in it. But you do live up to the fact that, you are connected to others. And I think that maybe it's the connection that we are all driving for. And if cycling is a sport that, can be characterized as a bunch of people with addiction problems, well, then the opposite of, addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
That's so well put. That's I really love that. I really do. I think Luke would agree with that.
Yeah, the connectivity of sport in general is so positive if you view it that way, right?
Yeah.
That you see a lot of athletes that go the negative route, and it just never turns out, I think, the way they would envision that negative driver to the outcome that they would want, right? Like, I feel isolation and like that negative attitude eventually leads to isolation. And when you're in a team sport, you want to be connected, and as humans, we want to be connected. And I think ultimately, like you said, love should be the driver. Love of something.
That's right. And it doesn't mean you have to be in the best in the world. And that's maybe the false narrative of professional sports, is that we're all driven to be the best in the world, right? But people don't end up respecting you or liking you. You don't belong because you happen to be the best. In fact, sometimes that can be a negative, and that single-minded ambition can make you a real ass, and that can really drive, ironically, people away from you, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because in cycling, in that sport, there were some pretty big names where that's how they were viewed, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you look at, I think about Bernard Hinault, not
Yeah.
exactly the most lovable human being, particularly when he was riding and winning,
Yeah.
not known to be a warm and fuzzy kind of guy and not exactly a hero to all.
Yeah. That's right. And look, you don't have to be a hero to all. Everyone's got to kind of live to their own drumbeat, if you will. But I do think that, what ultimately motivates me, what drives me is that sense of belonging, that sense of connection, and trying to break through the loneliness and isolation of being human, right?
Sure.
And it's interesting because there's a psychologist named Mustakas, a humanist, who wrote a textbook called Loneliness. And one of his definitions for loneliness was a fundamental breach between who one is and who one pretends to be. And in sport, there's a lot of
It's huge.
pretending,
Yeah.
right? There is a lot of trying to look cool and trying to be, the the person. There's a lot of that kind of, chest puffing that happens. And while that's maybe part of sport, it doesn't always have to be, and it's not the important part of sport.
Do you think that, and we don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole with this, but do you think pro cycling has changed a little bit? I mean, is it when when you're there and you're at events, do you see it being a little bit more inclusive? Is it a little bit more open now, or is it still, do you still see a lot of barriers?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. I mean, I've been in it long enough that I have a high level of comfort and self confidence in it. I know that, um, you know, no one's going to tell me if I'm cool or not in that context. Uh, I'm a unicorn, it's like, but, and so it's hard for me to be the person outside looking in to say, do people even see me as intimidating or see me as unapproachable? And I'm very, very mindful of that. So I try to coach myself and my team on this idea around hospitality and making sure that, we not just try to take care of one another, but we try to make each other feel good when we do that. Right. And that sometimes you can't always make things right with others. Sometimes you can't, be the person who comes in and save the day, but you can be empathetic still. Right. And that sense of empathy for others and that sense of how do I put myself in their shoes. I think that's really, really important. I also do think that there are a lot of ways to access the sport now. You don't have to just be a roadie, right? And that's pretty nice.
That's great. I mean, I think one of the like key things that I've been trying to work on more and more every year, or just in general with every human interaction, is empathy and the opposite view. Like if someone reacts poorly or negatively or has a negative view, I try to see it from their eyes. And I really think it opens up the world and image of what is important and what matters. And
Yeah.
ultimately, if you can be empathetic to them, but actually try to view it from their side of things, it just changes your perspective, and it changes the way you interact with people. And to
Yeah.
think that you're able to do that now when you return to events and return to cycling, I think that's awesome. And to teach a team now, you're doing that and teaching your team to react that way. You're just touching so many people through that kind of philosophy and mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, if there's one thing that I've learned is that the performance part of the equation matters way less than the human part of the equation.
For sure.
Absolutely.
No, for sure. Is that some of what fueled you to start Skratch? I mean, how did that happen? Where along the lines did you start thinking, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this, in terms of hydration and nutrition?
Well, I've always thought that there had to be a better way, and I was certainly already doing everything that I do at Skratch on the Pro Tour. I was already making my own drink mix. I was already making little sushi rice cakes, cooking as much of the food, from scratch as possible, helping to build out food trucks and hiring world-class chefs to come on the road with us so that we wouldn't be dependent upon just crappy food, and creating a sense of connection and morale around sitting at the dinner table with one another telling great stories. So that's always been part of my ethos. I never thought, well, to start Skratch. I never thought as an entrepreneur, as a business person. And I really started Skratch because I reached a point in my career where, I had begun working with Lance Armstrong. The federal investigation had started. And by association, I was thrown under the bus and was effectively shunned from the sport, and couldn't find a way to take care of myself or make a living anymore. Right. And so, at the same time, athletes who I'd worked with were asking me for that sports drink I used to make. And so with my good friend, Ian McGregor, who was a former pro and who had become injured and, was also in I think a bad place in terms of both of our identity shifts. And an old college roommate, Aaron Foster, was also struggling with his career and where he wanted to be and how he was going to connect with others. We literally started making this stuff using a paint shaker, at the local hardware store. We didn't think that it was really going to turn into a business, but it gave us something to do together and it gave us something to work for, gave us some purpose. And that's how it really started. It started, because I got to the point where I realized that if I didn't find a way to take care of myself, then nobody was going to take care of me. And I had given so much of my own self to taking care of others on the pro tour, even to where I ended up with Lance and RadioShack. And, I think that the sport was going through a lot of trauma during that point in time. And, unfortunately that hurt my own career. I think that obviously I was also complicit in all of that because I understood and knew all of the doping that was happening in the sport. And while I was internally working to correct that and make it better and make it an environment that was clean and that wasn't built on, cheating or coercion or all of the, vitriol and pain that entails, there was also this internal reconciliation that had to happen inside of the sport, which made us all complicit to an omerta of trying to save the sport by not showing how bad it was or how messed up it had gotten. And so, there was no way that you participated in pro cycling and weren't in some way either part of the problem or part of the solution. And so, I took my hits for that. But I think that, the positive is that I think we also did have an impact. And even in my own life, we called Skratch because there was this belief, I think, that I hold very near and dear as innately part of the American dream, that no matter where you find yourself in life, you can always start from scratch. And I found myself in that position.
That's, and it's really, thank you for bringing all that up. Talking about your journey and how that took place. I've always been a very, very avid fan of cycling. Obviously, Lance's participation in the sport was just kind of bolstered that love for the sport. But
yeah,
I think hearing what you're saying about it and what you were trying to do and still do with the sport is huge, because I still consider it one of the most, I still consider it the most beautiful sport in the world. Watching this past Giro and watching the Dauphine, and when you get guys going up a mountain, it's amazing, right? I mean, it's just, I don't know, it just gives a feeling like any other. So
yeah,
it's so amazing to hear how you took that, that very, very difficult situation, and you were able to turn it into such a major positive, where now you're helping millions of people, not just the very, very tip of the spear, but you're affecting and helping weekend warriors, people who are at desks all day long and in need of paying more attention to hydration and things like that. So how did you guys start getting to a place where you were thinking, hey, this could be something?
You take it one day at a time, and you don't do it by yourself, right? I think that's a key lesson. While I might be kind of the face of the company, without Ian, without Aaron, without Ian's wife, Jen, there were so many people who came and supported us in our local community. They believed in me. They believed in what we were doing. And you try to live up to that belief. that's I think a core. And I think that you take off little bite-sized chunks and you try to ignore the narrative of success, right? You have to be willing to fail, and you have to kind of sink on one hand into the reality that you're barely making any money, that it's barely working, that you have so many problems to solve, that the right bite size is like so far from the kind of dream or the vision of what it could be, right? And that's a contradiction when you lay down at night and you have the dream of what it could be. It's in stark contrast to the reality. And so how you live with those two things at the same time is, I think, a big part of the trick. And so, for example, people would tell us these narratives about how we were going to build a great brand and sell it and become multimillionaires. And you hear all these business stories. And I can tell you very clearly that those stories are a distraction, and those stories are largely bullshit. And that it doesn't happen like that, right? It's so much harder than you think it is. It's those success stories are very, very rare. You got to find a way to be happy with where you're at in order to eventually get there. There was a really important quote that was kind of at the very heart of the genesis of Skratch that we would repeat to ourselves all the time. And it was a quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And the quote was, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in one's mind and still retain the ability to function. One may realize the situation is hopeless, yet still work to make it better." And so we always knew that this endeavor was freaking hopeless.
Yeah.
like no chance in hell this would actually work. Yet every day we got up in the morning and we worked to make it a little better.
That resonates so much with me, Alan. I have my own business, started it from scratch, and just I was a high level athlete. I had all these visions of like this amazing company that was just crushing it, and I was going to get there tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't happen, right? It's just the slow grind that starts to build, and the day by day approach adds up to so much more than the 5-year. You got to have the 5-year plan, but you can't be 5 years tomorrow. And I think as an athlete, as a high level successful athlete, it's so hard to fight that battle in your mind of, I know, like, I am a high achiever and I want to hit that goal and I want to do it. So, I mean, you were even at the top, you were a professional. And so what kind of strategies did you utilize on your end that either you took from your cycling career or you took from mentors to help yourself? I know you talked about the step-by-step method, but how did you stay focused? How did you, combat those demons that we're not where we want to be at this time?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, you have to have the 5-year plan. You have to have the 10-year vision. You have to be able to tell people where you are headed, where you want to go. You've got to dream out loud. That's extraordinarily important. And goal setting is paramount. The thing is that you don't have to wait, and you can't wait 5 years to begin enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
And that is the mistake that athletes, and I think any entrepreneur, makes. They think that accomplishing their goals is going to make them happy. But the opposite is true. And what I learned in sport is if you can find a way to enjoy the daily process, right? And you really enjoy the daily process, it gives you such an advantage that you will accomplish those goals, right? And a lot of this work is based on the work of Sean Aker, a psychologist formerly from Harvard, who really talks about this setting sun that you never reach if all you're ever doing is trying to achieve your happiness through success. Well, you win one race, you're happy for a moment, but now you move the goalpost to the next race, and then to the next race, and the next race. And you're always chasing something, the setting sun that is past your cognitive horizon. And that really sucks. Yeah, so I think that the only way that you can pace yourself, the only way that you can take it day to day, is find the things that you enjoy, and to make sure that in your daily process, whatever that may be, that you actually enjoy that process, that that's fun for you, right? And as a business owner, you can dictate your own pace. You can run your own race.
Right.
You don't have to be keeping up with everybody else. And I think that once I began to realize that, that was key. I think the other part of it for me was that when we first started hiring people, I used to feel really responsible for like, oh crap, we got another person on payroll. Oh shit, they're about to have a baby. Like, oh, don't get married yet, man. Keep on living in that 1-bedroom apartment with 6 other dudes. You'll be fine. But it shifted when I started realizing that I wasn't the one taking care of them. They were the ones taking care of me. Right?
Yeah.
Every hat I've taken off and given to somebody else in this company, they have done it better. And they've made my life easier. Every time I hire someone, it's an opportunity for me to get I enjoy more within the company. Right? And I know on a certain level that I'm the only one who's privileged to be able to really do that. Right. And so when I do hire people, I try to make sure that they're taking this job because it's something that they think they'll really enjoy too. Right. And that they'll have fun doing. And let me tell you something. Last thing I want to do is any accounting or financial stuff, even though I'm really good at spreadsheets. So I want to make sure that my accountant loves accounting. I'm like, do you love being an accountant? Because if you don't, we're not going to hire you.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's beautiful advice.
Because I hate it.
Yeah. So talk a bit about what you saw in terms of the actual products that you guys have themselves, and what sparked in you the desire to, in a fairly crowded marketplace, right? When you talk about the general sport drink, or electrolyte replacement marketplace, what did you see setting you apart that was going to allow you to create some real market share in this area?
Absolutely nothing. We weren't that smart. We weren't that strategic. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. I was making this stuff in a paint shaker, man. So like, hey, made in a paint shaker, not in an actually FDA approved factory, more likely to kill you.
Ride the high.
Right. Just enjoy it while you can.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if I washed my hands that day. Like, what the hell? I think that the difference was we were being asked. We were being asked to do this by dear friends who also happen to be some of the best athletes in the world.
Yeah.
And they would call us up and be like, man, can you please make us that sport drink? And I'm like, no, you can go F yourself. Like, I'm in the middle of a federal investigation and I'm trying to soothe myself by watching copious amounts of television. Like, the last thing I want to do
is making you a drink,
making your ass.
Yeah, making you drink mix, putting it in a Ziploc bag, sending it to Belgium, and then having the feds knock on my door some more. Like,
exactly. Oh, powder in a plastic bag? Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, exactly. So what compelled me were those relationships, was friendship, was the fact that these riders are saying, we don't know why, but this is working better for us. It's solving a problem. And I'm very, very driven by solving problems. And one of the things that I could see as being different was that because we were making this, because this was simple enough to make in a paint shaker, it didn't have all the weird, artificial or quote unquote natural flavoring agents. It didn't have all the coloring agents. It didn't have, all the extra BS that might be associated with a lot of the, commercially available products. And so I think the simplicity is what distinguished us right off the bat. And it was the problem of GI distress, and that we solved that problem of GI distress, of flavor fatigue. So, it's not like we came out with a big marketing campaign. It happened by word of mouth. And I think that if a brand is nothing more than something that you trust, and that if it has an identity like any individual does, then that takes time to foster those relationships. You can't just buy Instagram ads and think all of a sudden that your talking points are going to be better than others, right? Because most of our competitors make really good products, and we respect the crap out of them and what they've been able to do. We were lucky enough to just be ourselves.
Is that so? Is it still that kind of that? Is that still kind of the way where people were coming to you and saying, "Hey, these bars that we're being fed on a on a regular basis are killing my GI. Can you come up with something better?"
Yeah, it's the only way. All of our product innovation at Skratch happens because there's a real athlete with a real problem that needs help getting it solved. So while I've always been a proponent of real food and not liquid carbohydrate, when Gwen Jorgensen was training for the marathon and she needed a liquid carbohydrate because she couldn't
Yeah.
ventilate,
Yeah.
like she was running so hard that her ventilation rate prevented her from actually chewing or eating food.
Yeah. Which
And
is
I,
pretty ridiculous.
yeah, and I started going on these long runs with her on a bicycle while she ran and could see how difficult it was. I was like, okay, let's find a way to solve this problem. And that turned into the super fuel product, or the solution of a very complex carbohydrate with highly branched cyclic dextrin as the source. So we don't have this innovation plan where we think about what does the market want. We have an innovation plan that goes through the list of athletes we work with, and we say, what are they complaining about? What do they want fixed? And how can we do this in a time frame that does give them an advantage, right? That's the only way that I think real innovation works. And if you're into economics, there's a economist named Michael Porter, taught at Harvard, and there are books written about the books that Michael Porter has written. And he talks a lot about strategy. And I think there are only two things in strategy that matter. The first is what you say no to, right? So staying highly focused, which for us, despite the fact that we're a food and drink company, approved, we are squarely an endurance athlete sports nutrition company, right? We're saying no to, all of the trends in the marketplace. We're saying no to stevia. We're saying no to what, might be the next hot thing so that we can stay focused on our niche. The next thing that is critical in competitive strategy after what you say no to is being unique, right? And the only way to be unique in a crowded market is to be yourself. Because we're all little snowflakes drifting through the sky.
Well, but I mean, to that point, you're very unabashedly yourself. I mean, I think anytime I've ever shown anyone Skratch's website, right, there's such a connection to you guys are laughing. You look like you're having a good time. I mean, everything about it just says it's welcoming, right? And it's, you can get into the science part of it if you want. You can dig a little deeper, which I appreciate, being able to go a little deeper and look at things. But there is a level of comfort when you're able to sit there and say, okay, well, you don't see, it's not like a bunch of guys in a lab, right?
It's
like
him mixing.
No.
Him mixing his drink in his paint bucket. Like
Right.
That's what's on the
it's not some athlete on a treadmill with, the VO2 max on, so it's a lot more relatable where you're like, okay, they're out on a stretch of road and they're watching somebody and that's real life, right? I mean, that's world applicability.
Yeah, I think fundamentally the marketing program at Skratch is built on all of the advice I would have given my younger high school self on how to make friends, which is like, stop freaking trying so hard, man.
I'm trying so hard. Yeah.
Eventually someone's going to like you. Not everyone is going to like you.
Right.
But you'll find a nerd group that will embrace you. And one day you might even be the leaders of the nerds, right? Like
supreme nerd.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that resonates with me because being anything else would be unenjoyable, right? And I do think that if you can genuinely be yourself, people will either like it or they won't like it. And that's clear and that's fine. And it's enough to sustain a business and it's enough to sustain profits and it's enough to sustain a living. And, I mean, how much do we really need to be happy in this world? I think that, if you were to imagine a group of monkeys, okay? And let's say every monkey needs 2 bananas to be really happy, okay? And that all the monkeys, they basically have like, some may have like half a banana. Some people have like 3 bananas. Some monkeys have 1 banana, but generally it's okay. And then all of a sudden you see this one monkey and it's got like millions of bananas it's hoarding, right? Like which monkey do you think is the effed up monkey? Like, who's the crazy monkey?
Which is
yet,
that's so counter though. Like if you look at what social media tells you though, right? It's like, no, that's the one that's doing it right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But what social media tells us is that that is the best human.
Right.
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 Right. So here's the deal, man. Just don't be the crazy monkey.
I feel like the fear of rejection is stronger than the fear of acceptance. Just we don't want to get we hate being rejected, right? And there's so much fear of doing something, and you're fearing that someone might not agree with you, or might not like what you're doing, or it doesn't sound smart enough, or it doesn't sound scientific enough. But ultimately, no one else cares because they're worried about the same thing. And it's like, as long as you find some people that like the same thing and you enjoy doing it, it's a good spot to be.
Exactly. Look, I used to wear a base layer on my t-shirt a lot because I have sensitive nipples. And, I was embarrassed, but now I'm like, screw it. The world can know.
Yeah. And to that point, you just said it. So it's okay. So it's okay.
Yeah. Put that on a loop.
Yeah. So all of these things that that we've been talking about, then how much of a surprise was it in 2020 Outside Magazine names you guys the best company to work for?
It was a surprise, but it was something that we had explicitly written down a few years earlier as a goal that we wanted to achieve with our people and with our business. And I think a lot of it was driven by, this strong vision, this kind of getting clear that we weren't going to sell this company and try to cash out, but that we wanted to have a place that was about, human dignity, right? That was about people first. And the realities of business make that really, really hard to do. And there is a leap of faith that you need to take. We started a minimum living wage program so that anyone off the street, whatever job, would have a living wage standard rather than the quote unquote minimum wage. And that's a big risk as a business. But I think that what's nice is that if you can be the one who extends the olive branch and extend that generosity, you get better people. You get people who are invested. And if they screw up, then they lose a lot. And so, I think that it's easy to give up a shitty job when you're getting shitty pay.
Right.
It's harder when things are better. And I think that the pandemic really pushed us over the top because as a small business, all the decision makers could sit in one room together and say, look, we have this much amount of cash in the bank. Are we willing to burn all that cash for a year to keep everyone here employed? And at the end of this year, let's imagine that we make no money, but let's imagine that we still have our team. Are we willing to start over again? And everybody was like, hell yeah, right? That's the proposition that you make. And that's the conversation you've got to have with yourself and with others, right? What are you willing to do to take care of not just yourself, but others, especially when those other people are really the people who are taking.
What was, how was life for you guys during the pandemic? What did that look like for you guys?
It looked like a lot of reforecasting. Let's reforecast again. Let's reforecast for completely losing our business. Let's reforecast because this could be boomtown. It was really bizarre. I think there was a ton of uncertainty. I think there was a lot of acknowledgement of uncertainty. We closed down the office. We kept our warehouse going in different shifts. We tried to establish as many protocols, not knowing what was right or what was wrong. We were kind of, in the dark, like a lot of people were in the dark. But it was incredible that the team really came together. I think we were very lucky that we had cash in the bank and we could create a sense of safety and security, first and foremost. Number two, we weren't beholden to like an outside investor who had expectations. We were just beholden to ourselves, and that made things a little better because we take a deep breath and say, how do we put people first? Do people have what they need at home? Do you have the right video camera? Do you have the right setup at home? How can we make things easier for you? And then I think that we were really lucky. Maybe about 6 years in our business, we started a business operating system called EOS, which is the entrepreneurial operating system based on a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. And it's a very, very structured way of running a business. It's very, very kind of, in some ways, very, very regimented in terms of meetings work like this. Here's the cadence of how you do your quarterly updates. Here's the cadence of how you plan for the next year and for the next 3 years and for the next 5 years. And because the team was very well versed in our business process, it was very easy to move that business process to video meetings, right? But I think that if we didn't have strong business structure, we would have been hosed, right?
Sure.
Because it was already still difficult, despite the fact that we had very strong processes in place.
Right.
And ultimately, it was, every single individual pulled their weight. Hats off to Ian McGregor, my CEO. His leadership stepped up a huge notch, especially around this ability that he has to make people feel safe. Right?
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that you have to inspire people. You have to make them feel safe.
Yeah, there was a lot of fear over the last year.
Yeah.
Uncertainty, fear, and like you said, creating some certainty, some safety, and just, again, you came from the team mentality and you're able to create your own team.
Yeah.
I think that is huge.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I would say the maybe more fundamental thing that I haven't addressed in terms of the process is you talk about values and you talk about corporate values, and you think about the poster on the wall with the eagle and like the rowing team. They're like, we're all rowing together and like eagles with us, and then like you make up a haiku and everything's good, right? I actually did make up a haiku. The eagle is strong. It can fly high in the sky. The eagle is proud. Anyways, aside from that, core values are extraordinarily important. Talking about them all the time is extraordinarily important. Talking about them at ad nauseum is even more important. And for us, it's 4 key values. The first is be real, be yourself, right? That's part of our authenticity. That's part of what allows me to just be myself and allows everyone to be themselves. It's an expectation. The problem with being real, quote unquote, is that it doesn't give you permission to be a jerk. And so our next major value is empathy, right? Being able to put ourselves in other people's shoes. After that comes from my background in sports performance. There is a real expectation around accountability and responsibility. Performance being going the extra mile all the time, right? And if you can't do that, if you can't hang, this is a brutal environment to work for. And almost always people will opt out before we need to fire them. They're just like, you guys are too just turned on for us, whether it's having fun or working hard, play hard, work hard. That's another haiku somewhere. And then the last value is that we do this together. It's this real realization on my hand that like trying to do this by yourself or being the quote unquote man, right? That's BS. And here's the deal. You don't use these values to judge people as much decisions yourself, right? You use them because every single day as a business owner or in any occupation for that matter, you got to make hundreds of decisions potentially. And if you don't have a framework by which you make your decisions, you're going to spin your wheels and the paradox of choice will destroy you. But if we say, hey, look, this doesn't fit being real, if it doesn't fit being empathetic, if it doesn't fit our performance expectation, if it doesn't fit how we value working together, then that's not the right thing for us. You're able to say no. You're leaving things off the table and you're focusing on what you need to do the way that you want to do it.
Just it's really great business advice. And then, I mean, the great thing about that advice you just talked about and those principles is that can be applied to friendship, performance, sport, right? Like, I think you can carry that over to about anything in your life. And that is an awesome thing. It's just like the snowball effect. When you create that or you're part of a team like that and you can see that in other parts of your life, your your performance, your mindset. It's really compelling. And yeah, we just really appreciate you sharing that with it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it does sound cliche until you realize that it keeps you sane,
Yeah,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
It's
And it's
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that you have people self-select too, where you say people will opt out before you have to have that very uncomfortable conversation.
yeah, you don't like rules, you don't like process, this is not the place for you, right? You don't like high expectations, you don't like our value set, it's not the place for you. You don't like the way that we do accounting and have an open book, financial, deck, it's not the place for you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. So with that, you guys win that, you win the award. What did you take from the pandemic that you're still using moving forward? It shifted so many, obviously it shifted almost everybody's business, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
way people did things, it shifted the way we did things as well. What are you guys keeping and what are you able to kind of return to, so to speak, when it
Yeah.
comes to your business?
Yeah. I think what I took away is the right team members are intrinsically motivated, and you don't have to worry about them getting their stuff done, which means that you can be more liberal about how they choose to live their lives, which means that for us, the remote working has worked really well. And as we move back to, kind of normalcy, we're not going to open up the office again until October, right? Number two, when we do open up the office again, we are only going to allow in-person meetings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, which means that if you have an in-person meeting, you only have to be in the office Tuesdays or Wednesdays. The rest of the time, you can free-range and be wherever you want. You can be in the office every day if you want, but you could also be at home those other 5 days, or be on the road, or be wherever you need to be to live the life that you have to live. And so going to effectively not a 2-day work week, but a 2-day office week,
Yeah.
Right.
I think is so awesome, because that's
Yeah,
what
that's
I've
very-
always wanted,
That's very
right?
It's gonna. I think a lot of companies are gonna move similarly in that respect. It's gonna change commuting, business. There's gonna be this huge, crazy shift that has already begun, right? But it's. I think it's gonna be the better for the worker, or the person that wants to live their life. Right?
That's right. That's right. I know if I were to really talk to every single person on my team, I know that after about 2:30 or 3 o'clock, everyone's fried,
Nothing left.
sure.
and we might as well be on a bike ride between, 3 and 5 o'clock, and then settling in with our families and actually cooking dinner, putting our kids to bed, and then, potentially 8 or 9, if you want to work another hour or two, that's another good time to work.
Right.
So I think that normalized over the pandemic, and that was a gift, because otherwise it's really hard to buck up against those social norms without seeing that it works yourself and developing the trust in one another.
It's awesome.
So as we kind of wind down here, and we've covered so much, what are our focus on the show is obviously optimizing human performance. And what are 3 things that you've learned from all of your experiences, your current, what you're doing currently? What are 3 things that you would suggest to our listeners to really focus on optimizing life? And it doesn't, not
Yeah.
performance, but optimizing life.
I tell myself these things all the time. And so, even having the knowledge is difficult to execute, but, this is stuff that I strive to do as much as I can. The first is consistency. The human body, our physiology thrives on consistency. You talk about our circadian rhythm. You talk about the hormonal shifts that happen during sleep versus during wake. You talk about how every important system in our physiology is cyclical. When you break through as an athlete or person, you are putting so much additional stress on your body that it does not need, that ends up being detrimental. And so I can probably tell whether an athlete is doing well or not doing well by simply looking at the consistency of when they go to freaking bed at night. If they're always in bed at essentially the same half-hour window, they are hauling butt. But if there's a lot of variability to when they go to bed, they're having a hard time, right? Consistency is everything, especially around when you go to bed and sleep. And it's probably more predictive, the variability of when you go to bed at night, than maybe any other sports variable out there for an individual's performance, right?
Huge.
It predicts everything.
Huge.
I think number two, around diet and nutrition is heat, thirst, and hunger, right? If you're hungry, eat something. If you're thirsty, drink something. If you're not, don't worry about it. And I think that the contradiction in sport is always that when you are working out and exercising, you need to feed the crap out of the machine. Athletes are consistently underfueled when they're working out and overfueled when they're not working out, right?
Very true. Very true.
And if you want to make weight, the only way to do that is to overfuel your workouts and then underfuel the rest of your life, right? So that you can still work hard despite being in a caloric deficit. So that's another kind of key thing and then that takes some planning, right? You got to have, the whereabouts to plan that and to support yourself when you're out training and time that effectively, right? Sure. So that you don't crater. And maybe the third thing, and I think most athletes are so bad at this because they see themselves, they want this persona of being independent and being successful, that they're really, really, well, maybe it's two extremes. They're either total selfish a-holes, right? And they expect everyone to do everything for them. Right. Or I think if they're more human and they're like the rest of us, they have a really hard time asking for help.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And setting expectations with their friends and families about what they're trying to achieve and getting them on board, right?
I mean, I think that we see so much of that. As a coach, I see a ton of that, where you see people wanting to probably take on more than they should, or than they comfortably can, and then not recognizing that is a recipe for disaster, where you are setting yourself up to fail and kind of put yourself in a hole, because you're just not, and why is that such a barrier for people, do you think?
Instagram, I don't know. Let's blame everything on Instagram.
We do,
right?
We do. Oh, I blame social media. It's okay.
So, for example, let's say that what an athlete that you're working with can consistently do every week is 6 hours of training, right? Let me tell you something. If they consistently nail those 6 hours a week, they'll do better than trying to fall into this trap where they have to be doing 15-hour weeks and they're barely managing their lives.
Right.
Right. So consistency, and the reality check of what makes them, what is sustainable, right? We over glamorize the American work ethic, and certainly I have found myself in situations where if I need someone to pull an all-nighter with me and drive across, Europe in one sitting to get to some bike race to do a feed zone, I'm not going to call an Italian to do that with me. There's no way.
Easy on our people here. Easy. No, I would not.
But an American Italian would.
Yeah. No,
right.
Trust me, I would never call any of my relatives in Italy for anything like that. No, I'm 100% with you on that.
Because they would think you're insane.
Yes, absolutely.
But an American is like, yeah,
absolutely.
Do this thing.
Yes.
Right? Like mass vaccination sites. Yes. Put on a mask. Go F yourself.
Yes.
Like we love big, grandiose solutions and things, and we love pulling all-nighters, but we don't want to put a mask on to go to a coffee shop because that's too little. It's too small.
Too small.
Too easy.
Too easy.
I can't be on fire trying to accomplish something huge.
I almost think if they would have said gas masks.
Oh,
just wear gas.
Yeah.
Create your own gas mask.
Yeah.
No.
It's so funny you called out my people on that, because
Let me tell you something. My people wouldn't do it either. Any of my Chinese relatives would be like, "You're crazy."
I am certain about 30 minutes into the ride, they'd be like, "We're done. That's it. We're stopping. We're gonna either eat something or we're gonna get some coffee or we're done. That's it."
Yeah.
This driving thing, no, you're out of your mind. No.
Yeah.
Plus, they're terrible. They're terrible drivers. They're absolutely terrible drivers.
That's right.
Never
That's
on
right.
time either.
They're not on time. No, Italians are terrible with time. They're absolutely terrible with time. It's always stunning to me that they make it to the start line of a race on time. I am constantly shocked by that.
Yeah.
Well,
That's funny stuff.
Thank you so much. I know we know you're a busy guy. Thank you so much.
Where can people find out more about Skratch, about you, about your stuff?
Well, they can find more about it on your podcast, but they can also go
Absolutely.
to www.scratchlabs.com. And, our website has tons of information. You can also send us an email at info@Skratch Labs. And our customer experience team, I think, is the best in the world. And, we'll answer any questions that you have. And if they can't, they'll send you to me and I'll answer those questions myself. And, we'll go from there. And
When you order from Skratch, I just want to let people know you get a personalized. I love the fact that I get a personalized note every single time from whoever boxes my stuff. I think that's awesome.
yes.
I think that's
Yes.
I do like that.
That's amazing.
Yes. And, here's the deal. We get, we have this goal of getting everything between a 4 p.m. to 4 p.m. window. And I'm looking at our scorecard right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Over the last 7 weeks, we have been 100% at that metric. We measure the crud out of our warehouse performance. And for the last 7 weeks straight, we have hit 100% same day fulfillment.
Wow.
That's impressive. Yeah.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
Team Skratch.
And they write the notes.
They do. They're great. They're great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alan.
Yeah,
we really,
this
really
is awesome.
appreciate it. This was such a great talk, man. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you.
All the best.
All the best to you, sir. Later. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. We really do appreciate it. Don't forget to please join our Facebook group if you haven't already, and feel free to share our episodes and encourage others to become part of the group as well. Thanks again.